Susan Smith will soon be in front of a parole board in South Carolina. So what exactly is parole? According to South Carolina Department of Corrections, parole is the early release of an inmate from the Department of Corrections to the supervision of the South Carolina Department of Probation, Parole, and Pardon Services. The inmate will continue to serve his or her sentence under the department's supervision until the remainder of the sentence is satisfied. And that brings us to our final question. What is going to happen at the parole hearing? And joining us, a former prosecutor who prosecuted Susan Smith, Tommy Pope, and still with us, Attorney John Mobley. All right, let's start with you, Tommy. We read the formal definition and what happens at that hearing, but tell us what really happens. Are you there, the former prosecutor? Is a prosecutor there who presents the information to the parole board, or do they have a big old file for Susan Smith that they get to go through and look at everything?
I think there's probably a little bit of everything. Traditionally, when I was the solicitor, I would just send a letter to the parole board that said that I believe in truth in sentencing. The individual received a life sentence. I believe that's what they should serve. But in this instance, having spoken to David Smith and knowing how important it is, that's why I'm headed back there with him to relate the things we've discussed before, that the jury believed it was life. The jury believed she should focus on Michael and Alex, and that hadn't happened.
And let me ask, as we're looking at this, John, my understanding, and Tommy, you'll jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding, though, is Susan Smith herself will appear virtually, but that the victims, Tommy, let me just ask yes or no of you, the victims can choose to appear in person or can be virtual. Is that correct, Tommy?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
All right, John.
That's exactly correct.
John, what do you think of that? The fact that, she's going to be virtual. Well, she's convicted of the murder of her 2 children and in jail, so maybe that's an appropriate thing. And then the actual family members can be there in person if they choose to.
Yeah, if I was her attorney, I'd be jumping up and down objecting, just saying that's just blatantly unfair. I mean, you have to know that a live person is going to have a much more substantial impact, an effect on the board than a virtual appearance. It's just not the same. And if there's any advantage whatsoever to, being in person or appearing live, then she needs to be afforded that opportunity.
Well, that's an interesting argument, because I still get stuck on the fact she's convicted of killing her 2 children. Again, when you're joining us, just remember they were in their car seats in the back. They were buckled in. The car was pushed into the lake, Tommy, 6 minutes before they were submerged. So arguably they could have been rescued certainly during that time. But Tommy, talking again about what's going to happen at the parole board, my understanding also is, and I'd like you to speak to this, that you can see as many as 65 cases in a day before the parole board of 65 different people that they have to consider.
I think there's, obviously a great wait. I know there's a lot of letters that came in. I do want to point out, to John's benefit, he's virtual now, and I thought he's being very convincing. So I'm not sure we need to move Susan from the prison and bring her over. So I think that they could do just fine with the video. But you're right, Your Honor, they're going to have a number of cases to be heard. I'm under the impression that they will start Susan's before, just because of the potential for, numerous witnesses that some other folks may have. John may be able to weigh in. Someone had asked me, I didn't know if traditionally defendants did have attorneys appear for them that may appear live, and John may have had more experience in that.
And it's funny, because that was one of my questions along, John, with this. I understand, again, in South Carolina, 8% approximately of individuals that come up for parole are released on parole. That's a low number, obviously. So, John, I think most attorneys are going to argue they want to be there, but on the other hand, the defense attorney no longer represents them, I don't think, because they've been convicted. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and oftentimes, people do hire attorneys to represent inmates at parole hearings, and I think you definitely have a substantially higher probability of being released because you have someone that can make an organized presentation on your behalf, someone that could talk to you about your demeanor, someone that could advocate for you, someone that could put together the things that I recently talked about, for example, You know, I mean, if you have an inmate being released on parole, they don't know what to say, but they're sorry and kind of want to go home. You know, when I represent someone in a situation like that, again, I like to show the parole board that once this person transitions to private life outside of prison, they're going to have structure. They're going to have family support. They're going to have people in the community that support them. They're going to have a job. They're going to have a stable place to live while they get back on their feet and transition back to normal life. Because what that demonstrates is they have a lower likelihood of recidivism and returning to the same illegal conduct that put them in prison in the first place. Because what can happen when a person transitions from a substantial period of incarceration back to outside of prison life, they got to find a job. That's going to be hard. You know, if you can't find a job, you can't find a stable place to live, if you don't have any support, those are the types of circumstances that lead people to go back committing crimes, doing drugs, doing things to cope, doing things to make money, selling drugs, illegal activity. And I think the parole board has a higher probability of releasing someone when they see they're less likely to reoffend.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Tommy, just weigh in quickly. I think the reoffending risk is something that frequently means prisoners are not getting out.
Yeah, and I don't see Susan rolling 2 more kids in the lake. I think it's more for me and David, obviously, about the punishment that equates to the crime, and that's something they'll look at, and hopefully she will not be getting paroled tomorrow.
We're going to find out. Thank you to our guests, John Mobley and Tommy Pope. We appreciate all your expertise in joining us tonight.